Thank you. Hey, guys. How many of you were at the other session I did on UIT? Okay, good bit of you. So for those of you who haven't met me, Max Furmanov, part of the New York office, been at Accenture for 16 years, and actually spent most of my career implementing large, complex systems for different industries. And specifically, one of my last projects was the work we did for Walt Disney World, which I'll talk about here, which was one of the largest IoT implementations Accenture has done. I led technology delivery for that. So that's kind of my background. I'm a techie by background. To much of my wife's frustration, I spend my weekends still building app servers and Node.js, right? Rather than doing family things. So I enjoy the techie stuff. I still do that, and definitely still consider myself as a technologist and an architect. And I think IoT is very interesting because the systems that enable IoT are very cool. And they bring together a lot of technology elements that I've seen across my career in different custom applications. So that's why this has been a personal interest of mine, an area that I've spent a lot of time researching and driving innovation around and also delivering projects in. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about what I think is happening in the IoT space and the future of it. So, you know, IoT is a pretty well-defined topic, right? It's obviously basically a concept of all the everyday things around us being connected to provide a better, smarter, more personalized experience. But if you actually look at some of the things that are connected, you look at plane engines, you look at some sophisticated manufacturing machinery, a lot of connectivity has existed there for 30 years, for 40 years, right? There are sensors that can sense different things in mining environments and manufacturing environments and provide data. So really, IoT isn't anything new. There's some new buzzwords around it, right? But it's really nothing new. The interesting question I always ask is, why is it so pervasive now? What's happening now? And I think there are two things happening that are really bringing IoT to the forefront. One is the ubiquity of the internet. The internet is everywhere now. And so it's easy to take devices that are everyday physical devices and connect them. And the second thing that's happening is, I think the cost of sensors, the price point of sensors and actuators have really dramatically come down to a point where, you know, they cost cents now. You can buy sensors that sense basic things like temperature and, water, moisture, whatever, for really pennies. So it's become very, very cheap. So that's why I think IoT is at the forefront now. That's why I think IoT is so important now and why so many companies are taking advantage of it. I think what's really new about IoT, and like I said, just the fact of having connected devices, the fact of being able to sense the environment around you isn't new. We've had this for many, many years. But what's new now is the volume, right, at which we're doing it. When you look at a system like Disney World, when you look at large, complex IoT applications, they're generating an enormous amount of data, okay? And that presents many interesting challenges. So this is the obligatory statistics slide. Every IoT presentation has to have one, right? Where, you know, you hear all these stats around, we're gonna have a gazillion devices and, you know, everyone's gonna start using IoT. And I think that's all true, but again, what I think is really interesting here is not necessarily these stats, but what that means to technology architects designing these systems, right? And how this is going to impact what those systems look like. And that's, again, data. So what is the opportunity, right? We said that price point of these devices is coming down, ubiquity of the internet is allowing everything to be connected, so everyone's going after it. But what's really the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is immense. If you think about planes, for instance, and you think about being able to predict maintenance on a plane because you can sense wear and tear on different parts, it could address things like this, right? Where a Airbus 380 plane sitting in a warehouse waiting for a part to be fixed, that's, you know, off schedule, will cost more than $1 million a day to the airline. So if they can use IoT technologies to predict some of these maintenance events and plan them in advance, there's a tremendous opportunity. And this is one example, right? Obviously, maintaining hardware, maintaining a physical plane. But I think that opportunities are immense in IoT. If you think about what we can do with transport and connecting transport, giving people data around when transport arrives, monitoring things like infrastructure around transport, that can create productivity enhancements for everyone. You think about connected spaces, buildings, facilities that can better monitor their environmental impact, know when to turn on and off temperatures, know what time of day it is. There's a tremendous opportunity there. Smart parking. I read somewhere that up to 40% of cars in New York City are simply looking for a parking spot. 40% of cars on the road in New York City driving around are people looking for a parking spot, right? So if you think about the impact some of these things can have, it's really incredible. We are working on a number of opportunities with large cities where they want to create a smarter city infrastructure. Singapore, Dubai, all have projects now to make their cities smarter and more effective. Connected health. I've got some good examples of connecting different medical devices and really improve lives of patients. We've got an interesting project we're actually doing in Liquid Studio, which I mentioned earlier, with a life sciences company in North America who is experimenting with a set of sensors to be able to connect a patient who would normally need to be hospitalized, but instead keep them at home. Okay, so there are certain situations, certain scenarios, certain diseases where they can effectively monitor a person that today requires hospitalization, but they can monitor them at home and respond to different situations that arise. And of course, there's a huge business case for insurance companies because cost of hospital stays is incredibly expensive, especially in the US. And of course, there's a tremendous improvement in quality of life for the patient, right? So these things can have really a tremendous impact on us. And then finally, and this is where I think we're seeing a lot of IoT today, is in commerce, right? In products you buy. Companies that are making products are transforming themselves to also offer you services around those products, right? And create an experience, right? How many of you guys heard of a little company called Apple, right? Apple isn't selling you iPhones. Apple isn't selling you MacBooks. Apple sells you an experience, and they're using their devices as a channel into you, right? But those devices are connected. Those devices are smart. They know things about you. They know what you do during the day. They know what kinds of things you're trying to buy, and they can build services around those devices. So product companies are really transforming themselves into becoming service-based companies. So adoption of IoT, we see it in these four value chain stages, okay? The first one is becoming pretty common, and that's about taking IoT technology and adopting it to make your operations more efficient. That's the plane example from Airbus. I can connect my plane, I can make the operation of that plane more efficient because I know I can predict maintenance events. I can take IoT devices, put it in my supply chain, into my manufacturing plant, and I can get smarter about how I operate, right? So those are the most obvious use cases and where we see IoT starting with large enterprise companies. And then the second step in the value chain is what I just said earlier about Apple, which is shifting your business model to be more service-based. There's an interesting company, I forgot the name of them, but they make X-ray machines, right? And they provide them to doctors. So if you're a doctor and you need to provide X-rays, you buy this machine. And what this company realized is that if they connect that machine and collect data about how it's being used, it can offer a service about how to make your practice more efficient and productive. And it can offer aggregated information about how doctors are leveraging X-ray machines and who's doing more or less, right? So this is a completely different business that this company has gotten into, from their product. But they're leveraging their product, they're leveraging the asset they've got to do that. And I've got some other cool examples on that in a bit here. The third step in the value chain is my favorite, and it's the outcome-based economy, right? IoT devices allow us to measure things we couldn't measure before, in ways we couldn't measure before. There is a theater in Barcelona, a comedy theater in Barcelona, where you come in and you don't pay an admission fee. Instead, at the end, they present you with a bill that says how many times you laughed. They've got connected cameras monitoring every person sitting in the audience, and they will record every time you exhibit a smile. And you will pay 5 euro cents per smile leaving this theater, right? They're really charging you for the outcome, right? You're not paying to get into the theater, you're paying for the experience you've had, right? And it's exciting. It actually, people are a lot more excited because it's kind of a cool technology, but also because they feel like they've paid for what they've received, right? And the revenue for this theater has, I believe, gone up twofold after they've implemented this, right? So it's very, very, very interesting. So it's all about using IoT technologies to sell outcomes versus selling kind of a, a ticket. And then finally, this is, I think, where we're heading, is autonomous environments, right? I was at the Tesla factory. Many of you guys have heard of Tesla. Is Tesla popular in Finland? So I was at the Tesla factory, and there's not a human being to be found, right? It's actually very interesting. There's a huge, you guys have probably been following the U.S. Political circus, maybe the right way to say it, over the past couple of months. We've, of course, been following it as well. But what's interesting there's a lot of political debate about manufacturing jobs leaving the U.S., right? And how, China has taken over all the manufacturing jobs. What's interesting is if you walk into a place where we do manufacturing in the U.S., like a Tesla factory, right, there's not a human to be found. So what I think a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of politicians maybe don't want to talk about, is that it's not China that's taken away a lot of manufacturing job, although there is some of that. But I think a lot of it is the automation that's happening in manufacturing. And it's because you can apply technologies like IoT and really transform how manufacturing is done. So this, I think, is where we're headed, to end-to-end automation for these kinds of environments, which really transform not just how manufacturing is done or how you operate, but also the roles of people in your organization, right? So this has pretty wide-ranging impact. And again, if you heard Thomas's point this morning about when he talked about the tech vision, this really has a huge impact on the people. And that's why our tech vision is all about the people. So let me take you through some interesting stories about IoT, because I think the most interesting way to present IoT is to talk about some examples of what's happening, right? Like the Barcelona Theater. These are some really innovative, really imaginative ways of how IoT is applied. This is a project Accenture has done, and it was for a company called Marathon Oil, and it was in their oil facilities where they have a lot of workers work in a pretty dangerous environment. And they've used IoT to actually sense in that environment when there are things like gas leaks, for example, right? And based on that, knowing where people are and be able to bring them to safety faster, right? So IoT can really, in this case, it's providing a level of safety to workers that didn't have it before, and it reduces the number of incidents, right? And in some cases, deaths that occur in these environments. This is a project we also did with Philips, right? And Philips makes a device that's a heart monitor. You can put it on, right, if you guys may have family members that have heart issues, and often a doctor will give you this patch to wear for a day or 2 or 3 days, and you come back and they collect some data and they analyze it. Well, we helped Philips build a platform that collects that data continuously from the heart monitor that's now connected. And what that's allowing them to do is it's allowing them to create real-time care to the patient. The data is much more accurate and much more frequent and much more real-time, but it also is able to correlate things like where you are when your arrhythmia spikes, for example, right? So if they know that every time you have arrhythmia, you happen to be at a McDonald's, right? They can advise you to maybe be a little bit more cautious in how you eat. This is actually a pretty cool project that uses a wearable device, wearable glasses, to help employees who are assembling plane seats to do so with the instruction manual loaded, into their glasses. But I actually think there's even a cooler example that we are working on right now with Lockheed Martin, which is a U.S. Department of Defense contractor, and they're building the F-35 fighter jet for the U.S. government. The assembly of the plane right, when you build out all the parts, right? So Lockheed Martin will build the wing, they'll build the fuselage, they'll build the cockpit, and then they bring all those parts into this really big plant, and they assemble it there into the plane, and the plane flies away. The process of attaching a wing to the fuselage, there's like 1,000 different connection points between the two, whether it's wires or whether it's rivets or whatever, right, bolts. And so the way the process works today is an engineer who's doing the assembly will have a manual that's like 500 pages, and they'll go through it and they'll say, okay, this red wire connects to this red receiver or whatever. Let me do that. Let me look down at the next step, right? So we've used augmented reality glasses to actually overlay the instructions onto the plane. It's a very, very cool project, very interesting project. We had Pierre, who is the CEO of Accenture, visit the studio, and we showed him this. And as we were showing it, we realized, funny tangent, but we realized that because this is a Department of Defense F-35 fighter jet project, we actually cannot show it to anyone who's not a US citizen, and our CEO is French. So what we had to do is we had to show him the plane blurred out in the demo that we did, so he couldn't actually see how the F-35 is built and connected. But some cool application of a connected, glasses that really transform how these things are done. This is an interesting example from France. Their postal service, as most postal services, are slowly going out of business. When was the last time you guys sent a letter to someone in the mail? Wow. There's 2 people. Well, 10 years ago, it would have been this whole room, right? Or maybe 15 years ago. But so postal services have a problem, right? But they also have a real cool asset, which is a person walking around everyone's house every day of the week, 5 or 6 days a week, or maybe 4 days if you're in France. So they said, how do we leverage this asset? What can they do? Well, I live in New York City, where every 2 months or 3 months, the gas company that provides me gas sends a person out to my house who needs to read my meter that's at the house to tell me how much gas I used, right? Well, why can't the postal worker have a connected device that reads that information as they pass by? And if you start thinking about other use cases you can think about things like monitoring the environment, monitoring infrastructure, that light is out, the sidewalk's crumbling, whatever it is, right? And you could even get into some commercial use cases around home security and things like that are really, really powerful. So this is taking, an asset they've got and turning it into a platform to do something completely different, right? And there are actually examples of governments and agencies and companies starting to do that and apply that. How many of you guys know someone with asthma? How many of you guys have heard of a company called Asthmapolis? Anyone? They make a connected inhaler. And one of my clients is a large pharmaceutical company in North America, and one of the doctors that works there is a specialist in asthma, and he says, I think it's something like if a child or an adult uses an inhaler 3 times within an hour, there's an 80% chance they will need an emergency care. So wouldn't you like to know that if that was like your 8-year-old and they're on their second, inhaler shot in 20 minutes or something like that? So this will allow you to do that. Not only that, when you go to a doctor, right? Have you been to a doctor with a 9-year-old and the doctor says, hey, did you have difficulty breathing, right? What does a 9-year-old say? I don't know. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Where were you? They can't answer those questions most of the time. So what this will tell you is when it happened, where the child was, or the adult for that matter, right? So it provides you a lot more information that doctors can use. So some really, really cool applications in the healthcare space. And then, of course, my favorite one, everyone's favorite one, the Disney Magic Band example. How many of you guys have been to Disney World in Florida? How many of you have been there in the last year? Before. Ah, okay. So they had the cards. They had the little card. Okay. Yeah, so a couple of years ago, Disney realized they have an issue, and in their parks and resorts, they had a constant number of visitors per day, but revenue per guest was dropping over the past, actually 10 or 15 years. And they've done a bunch of analysis, and they figured out that the reason this is happening is because the demographic of people who are coming to the park is changing. Their target demographic has always been young families, because that's what the park is built for, but it's also who brings in the most revenue, right? Because it's your 4-year-old that wants to buy the 5-foot stuffed Mickey Mouse doll while you're in the park that's bringing revenue to Disney. And they were increasingly losing that demographic, instead getting older people who already didn't have kids or had kids out of the house and were coming there just to experience the park themselves. And they were spending less money. So Disney said, how do we attract the new millennial generation? How do we attract, what do these people want, right? What do these families want? Well, it turns out they want a personalized experience. They want a connected experience. They want a seamless experience. And if you have been to Disney parks, you probably know there's a lot of lines and there's a lot of frustration, and it's not very personalized. You go through the park and have the same experience I have, right? So that's what Disney set out to achieve. They wanted to create a seamless experience. So and they wanted to create a personalized experience. So the band has 3 transmitters in it. It has a short-range RFID, long-range RFID, and a secure transmitter. And they're using the band to, one, create a more seamless experience. So your band is now your ticket. Your band gets you scheduled rides onto, scheduled times onto different rides. It also is your key to the room. And you can also use it to buy different things in the park, which, by the way, increased their revenue from stuff people bought like twofold, because it's now so much easier to actually buy things. So it's really, really incredible. But also, the band is your key to having a personalized, unique experience. When you sign up for a Disney World trip, you will go and fill out a profile that will let Disney know, if you choose to, why you're coming, who is with you, what are your names, who are your favorite characters. And as you're in the park, they will create personalized, tailored experiences. You will have Cinderella come up to your daughter, knowing that Cinderella is her favorite character, wishing her happy birthday. You will have pictures taken of you as you're flying down, the roller coaster, and then you can buy a movie about your day in the park. Right? How much more personalized does it get? And I'll tell you a funny story. When their marketing team, because the way we did this deal is Accenture benefited from increased revenue that Disney had, right? The way we structured the deal. So we actually had a skin in the game of making this successful. And when the marketing team came back to us and said what they were going to charge for some of these additional services, we thought we were screwed because, I could not believe that people will pay as much as they pay for a ticket to have some of these experiences. And tickets to Disney World are not cheap, right? So I was shocked. I was even more shocked that twice as many people as our original business case stipulated actually signed up for these services. So people crave this stuff. They crave personalization, and they're willing to spend a lot of money for it. And for those of you guys that were in my session before, I talked about how this is changing expectations, right? I talked about how this is changing our expectations of what technology can do. And IoT is key to that. We now expect everything to be connected, everything to be personalizable. And once you experience that from one of your companies or products you interact with, you expect it from everywhere. It's really hard to dial back. So let me show you a quick video that the Disney marketing team put together advertising the Magic Band program.
Hi. I'll take a large coffee and leave room, please.
That's $3.26. $3.26.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Oh. There you go.
Next. Hi. Hi, can I help you?
Oh, yes, 2, please. Oh, There you go.
Oh, I don't, what is that?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Once you've experienced My Magic Plus at Walt Disney World Resort, you'll want to use it everywhere.
This is going to be awesome.
So what they're selling you is not a ride. What they're selling you is not Mickey Mouse. What they're selling you is an experience, a unique, personalized, tailored experience that's seamless and simple, right? That's what IoT enables. So let me talk a little bit about what building an IoT application looks like, because I think there are some unique challenges, unique architecture challenges, unique technology challenges in building these kinds of systems. First of all, building IoT systems is pretty hard. It's pretty hard because of all this. Because, first of all, there are no standards, or there are very few standards. There are many different types of networks. There are many different types of devices. There are many different types of interfaces. These systems tend to be incredibly distributed. They tend to have all this complexity. So building IoT applications is hard. Second of all, remember when we used to build web applications? We all knew what they looked like. There was the web tier, there was a controller tier, there was a services tier, there was a database, right? Anyone could draw up what that looks like at a high level. We all knew there were standards, there were patterns, right, that were well publicized. No such thing in the IoT world. How many of you guys are proud owners of a Nest at home? Okay, one person, wow, just one in the room. Well, how many of you know what Nest is? Okay, everyone knows what Nest is. Most people know what Nest is. It's a smart thermostat, okay? So it's got a bunch of sensors in it that can sense the environment in your house. It can sense the temperature, it can sense whether someone is in the house or not, and it will dial up or dial down temperature based on learning your preferences, right? Well, for those of you that know about Nest or may have it, you probably have set up a mobile app on your phone that can control that Nest, and you can probably pull it out right now and change the temperature in your house. Well, setting that up, using the app, having Nest in your house, is setting up an IoT application. It is an application that uses sensors and actuators in an environment to make your life more seamless and more easy, right? That's a pretty simple example. Contrast that with Disney World, okay? First of all, let me tell you a little bit about Disney World, because I think it's a really unique and interesting place for those of you guys that haven't been there. It is 47 square miles, which I actually believe is probably close to the size of Helsinki. It's bigger than the city of San Francisco, okay? And it's bigger than 17 countries in the world. I was given a presentation about what we did at Disney to the government of Singapore, and somebody said to me, how is this relevant? You're talking about a park versus us being, a municipality with, millions of people. I said, this park is bigger than your municipality. You're one of those 17, right? And it's absolutely true. So Disney World is a very, very complex place. Disney World, it is estimated, they don't publish these numbers, but it is widely speculated that they have 500,000 people in the parks every day. 500,000 people. That's a tenth of Finland in the parks every day. Their bus system is larger than the city of Orlando's. Their police force is larger than the city of Orlando. Okay? They have 250,000 people using their transit system every day. They have more hotel rooms than the city of Amsterdam. They have 300 restaurants that they operate. And the United States government considers Disney World an actual city. They're treated the same in the eyes of the federal government as New York. There's a very interesting book, to digress a bit, if you go and read about the biography of Walt Disney and how he built Disney World. It's a phenomenal book, gives you insight into some of the creativity and some of the thought process. I'm very fascinated with Disney World, with Disney, the corporation. I think they're a very interesting company with a very, very interesting culture. But the point of this is there are some real challenges building an application that can sense and actuate in this kind of an environment, right? Can you imagine this environment plus having to integrate, right? I mean, IoT systems aren't just the new, lightweight, fun stuff that you heard Matt talk about and I talked about in UIT, right? Some of these systems that it needs to rely on have been built in the 1970s, right? And they're old COBOL stuff, and they're revenue-generating applications that are going to be around for a while longer, right? So we needed to integrate these multiple generations of technology in this environment. We also had a very large number of systems we needed to integrate. I think we had something like 20-plus systems of record. Of course, the data you're dealing with is high volume, and a lot of it is really, really important to process real time. If somebody buys a ticket at your ticket booth, you want to make sure they can get into the park, 3 seconds later when they walk through the turnstile, right? So that's really important. We had 1,000 developers on this program at peak building this application. 1,000 developers. They were across probably 10 or 12 different time zones and from multiple vendors, including Accenture. And finally, the technology itself was very challenging. Some of the sensory devices, some of the actuating devices A lot of this stuff is brand new. It's very leading edge. We had to tweak it. I can't tell you how many times my team was called at 10 o'clock at night, once the park shut, to go into Disney World and ride the rock and roller coaster at 60 miles an hour back and forth while they were tuning the readers that sensed your location, right? Because you're sitting in the roller coaster and the person sitting next to you is, like 4 inches away, right? And they're wearing a band, you're wearing a band. Your arms could be up in the air, they could be on your knees, they could be on the sides, you could be wearing it on your left hand or your right hand. And I need to be able to know which photo to associate with you versus your neighbor, right? So some of the challenges around that were really, really immense. The volume of people, the privacy and personal information concerns, right? Disney sees themselves as a family company, and the last thing they want to do is make you feel uncomfortable in that environment. So they were very, very sensitive to privacy and security, okay? And then, of course, if you've been in the parks, you know that everything in there is, looks like a Mickey Mouse, right? There's nothing that looks like a, RFID sensor, right? Because the world in Disney World has to be magical. Everything has to blend in. So not only did we have to figure this technology out, but we also had to obfuscate it into the environment, right? One funny thing about Disney World is if you've ever been to Magic Kingdom, when you're standing in Magic Kingdom and you look around, all you see is rolling hills, okay? And that was done by design. You know that if you've been there, you know that when you park and you pull up to Magic Kingdom, you don't actually park near the park. You park and then you take a train into the park. The reason they did that is because they don't want you to see the cars. That would disrupt the magic, right? If you saw parking lots while you were in the park. And actually, there's no facilities around the park either. What they do is all the facilities for Magic Kingdom are underneath. Magic Kingdom actually sits on top of a 5-story building. And underneath it are roads with cars. Most people don't know that, right? Because it looks like you're sort of, in the park. But they've hidden all that. So we have to do the same thing with this technology. So this is, remember, for those of you guys that have heard Matt's talk about lightweight architecture, right? He talked about, hey, don't just, build a bunch of products. Don't just pull a bunch of products together. This is that slide. It's the products we used, on Disney World. It was an immensely complex application. We had to use an inordinate amount of technologies. You're not supposed to be able to read all that. It's just supposed to give you a sense of the scale of the solution and how complex it was. We had a couple of challenges that really stand out in my mind. The first one is, how do you orchestrate this application? When you're building a web application, orchestration is pretty trivial. Somebody clicks a button on a screen, and that triggers a transaction to happen. Very easy, okay? But in this environment, there isn't a single style of interaction that triggers transactions. You want transactions to happen depending on sometimes what happens, at a sensor level, sometimes by a user action, sometimes via the web. And so thinking about how to abstract that complexity and orchestrate transactions in this application was one challenge that stood out. The other one is IoT systems tend to be very distributed in nature, okay? You have different devices on the edge, you have different systems of record, you have web applications, you have users in the environment. And one of the most challenging things is moving data around that entire system. And we used an event handling framework to do that we custom developed for the Disney environment. But that was one of our key challenges as well. And then data itself, right? I mean, I think there's a couple of tracks here that talk about data and big data and what's happening. Well, in IoT systems, data is bigger than big, right? The volume of data you have to deal with is immense. And for those of you guys, that have architected traditional web applications, for example, traditional systems are designed around a centralized data store. It sits in one place. That's the place where all transactions get sent. That's the place where you get all your data from. It's very nice and neat. This world isn't like that. In this world, you have a centralized data store. You have data in a cloud. You have data in systems of records. You have APIs that provide you data. You have data near the edge devices where the sensors are. Data is very, very highly distributed, and that data needs to be put in the right place at the right time for it to be effective, and that's another major challenge. And finally, I think the hardest part about all this was actually not technology. The hardest part in delivering this project was in organizing 1,000 people to actually deliver something and organize a complex organization like Disney with many different business units, each having their own objectives and priorities and agenda to actually work together on a design that yielded what they ultimately wanted. And one of the things we did is we applied design thinking principles to this process to really focus on the user, right? To really focus on, again, the experience, going back to the experience IoT systems can create. So, to recap, where to get started with IoT? What do you need to think about when you're building an IoT application? I think first and foremost, and almost everybody forgets this, you need to think about the business. You need to think about the business case. I was preparing this presentation a couple of months ago for another session, and I was showing my wife what I was talking about, and she said, we have a connected dishwasher. Our dishwasher is connected. You could download an app and turn on the dishwasher from far away. And I was thinking to myself, what the heck is the business case around that? Right? Somebody invested time, research, money, technology in making my dishwasher connected. What is the use case for that? So, and maybe there is one, right? Maybe there are some use cases where that applies, but there's a lot of hype around IoT, and there's a lot of use cases around IoT that really aren't relevant. And I think what we need to do as technologists is help the business think through what the business use case is. And then secondly, so that's the first thing. Secondly, when you're designing IoT systems, there's so much hype around them, right? Everybody's got an IoT platform. Every company out there has an IoT platform. The truth is, IoT systems are highly complex, integrated applications that most of the time need to comprise of many different solutions. So know what the platforms out there do and don't do, right? And architect, which is a third thing you need to consider, the application to achieve the business objective, right? That was what I learned personally from Disney. So let me stop there and see if you guys have questions. Sure.
I'll give you the In almost all the cases where you talked here on IoT and data transfer, and the thing I'm interested in is also how is data security and also data privacy handled in these cases normally?
Yeah.
And especially data privacy. And if you consider the healthcare, for example, if you have a lot of data collected together and you want one doctor to see it, the other one not, and how is that normally taken care of?
I swear I don't do this presentation once without getting that question. I need to add this as a slide. I'll tell you the Disney story and what we did there. Disney is, like I said, very sensitive to security, very sensitive to privacy. They've done a couple of things throughout our design that were patterns we followed. Number one, the bands themselves had no data in them at all. The bands themselves had 3 IDs that were encrypted, but even if you decrypt the ID, you were really just getting a hash number that linked to your information in the database. So if someone lost the band, there wasn't anything they would get out of the band, and the guest could disconnect the band from their profile via their mobile app, or any Disney employee can do that for them. So that was one thing. Secondly, Disney very consciously asked all of the people who are participating in this program to opt in. No information is collected from you unless you opt in. You are defaulted to opt out of all this, and you have to explicitly opt in for data to be collected. Now, they make it very clear that they can only personalize and tailor your experience if you provide them the information that they need, but you do not have to do that. And then thirdly, Disney has actually spent a lot of time thinking about how they were going to use the data, even that you were allowing them to collect about you, and how they were going to approach you with that data. For instance, one of the things they did was every cast member, right, which is people in the parks that work for Disney, they walk around with an iPad. And as you approach them, if you're wearing a band, they have the capability on their iPad to bring up all the information about you. Not just who you are, but things like where you're staying, how many days you've been at Disney World, how much money have you spent so far, how many minutes you've waited in line today on average for your rides. So they can do things as you approach them. First of all, they can address you by name, and they can offer you a bottle of champagne sent to your room because they see that you are a guest that's staying in one of their most expensive hotels, and you've been here for 5 days, and you've spent an enormous amount of money with them. They have decided not to use that because it freaked people out. The very simple idea of approaching someone and they knowing your name freaks people out. What's interesting is that if your 4-year-old goes up to Cinderella and Cinderella knows the 4-year-old's name, that doesn't freak people out. But if they know your name, it does. So they've spent a lot of time thinking about how to design that and address both privacy and security, and they're very sensitive to that. And you have to be in IoT systems. There's some very interesting phenomenon going on around also encrypting and securing data between IoT applications. We're actually doing some research and some work in using blockchain to establish trust between devices without an intermediary in an IoT world. So there's some very interesting research and very interesting technologies that can be applied to this. Other questions? That was a long-winded answer to one question.
Just raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. No other questions? Actually,
Come to Disney World, check it out.
Yeah, actually, I would have one.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm interested in what kind of challenge is the power supply of all the bits and pieces in this kind of applications like the sensors and...
You said the power supply?
Yeah.
Like the physical power?
Yeah, the physical power.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge nowadays?
It is a challenge because of the distributed nature of the application and each edge device needing a power supply. Now, in Disney's case, these devices are actually in an environment where there's already power, right? They're on rides, so there was readily, access to power. But if you think about securing, for example, a pipeline, right, that runs through North Africa, an oil pipeline, there's typically no power there, so that is a huge challenge. The good news is a lot of these sensory devices have come down in power usage so much that, like for instance, the Disney Band has a battery in it for the transmitters that it uses. That battery can last 5 years. So you can often, deploy a lot of sensors and even actuating devices that are very, very low power. So.
So when we went 2 years in spring up to Florida and to Disney World, so I think one thing I read was also that people were able to obviously to operate the whole reservation of the rides and stuff via their mobile phone. But a couple of issues. First of all, the US operator thing, it's not for everybody for free to use like the operator's internet. So they rolled out VLAN to the whole resort, as we learned, bigger than Singapore. So from what I understand, there have been years at it. And then another one was also people run out of battery with their phone that they cannot really see when the reservation is and stuff. So I think they even had like charger lockers where you can lock in your iPhone and charge it, so you can actually see when your next reservation is and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So lots of problems, even around power.
Yeah, and they've learned a lot from that, and they continue to learn, I think. One of the things they've done is, first of all, they have rolled out Wi-Fi now, so you can use it. And they have kiosks. They've set up kiosks. Because a lot of people actually don't even want to carry a phone in the park. You're going on water rides, right? You don't want to have a phone with you. So there's kiosks where you can now do that kind of stuff, which was also something they added later because they realized, hey, people want to be able to now manipulate and aren't always able to their reservations and whatever else. So, okay, well, very cool. Thank you, guys. I think we're out of time. So hopefully that gave you a sense of what IoT applications look like and what's possible.
Thank you, Max.